How can we really know whether our intuition is speaking to us or if it's just the ego getting in the way? Because a lot of people have a difficulty understanding this contrast between being totally tapped into your intuition, completely being connected to who you really are, and trusting in that feeling versus the opposite feeling, which is a feeling of heaviness and anxieties and fears and worries. And those heavy feelings are really going to block you from creating what you want in your life. And it's going to completely block you from feeling into that intuition, because some people have this intuition, they get glimpses of this intuition, but then they actually doubt their intuition because the ego comes in later and actually blocks that intuition from coming. You might have an intuitive thought that is totally connected with your highest vision and what it is that you want to create. And then what happens is that the ego comes in through the back door right after that intuition and then blocks you from fully stepping into that. I've experienced this in my life. I've seen this happen with pretty much every single one of my clients and people that reach out to me. It's very normal, but to fully dive deep and trust that intuition 100% is about really understanding what that intuition is and how to fully step into that intuition. Because your ego always tries to get in the way and block you from stepping into that intuition, even though it probably already has gotten glimpses of what that intuition is. The ego still likes to come back. It still happens to me sometimes. It happens with my clients. It even happens with my mentor. You have to watch out for that ego trying to stop you from creating that vision that you want in your life. So if you're new to this channel, I want you to hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell, because I do post a new video every single day. Also, if you want to work with me one-on-one to let go of your ego, let go of the anxieties, let go of the fears, so you can step up into a thriving mindset and create what it is that you really want in your life, to create that vision, hit the link that's in the description box of this video to apply for a free consultation to see if you're a good fit for the coaching program. So in this video, I'm going to be sharing with you how to trust your intuition, because knowing how to tap into your intuition is one thing, but then trusting fully in that intuition is a whole nother story. It's a whole nother story. The question is, can you fully trust in that intuition? Well, first of all, do you even know what that intuition is? Can you make that differentiation in your experience between intuition and ego? And then can you fully trust in that? Because I know that for me in my life, I had this intuition for the longest time as I started to connect deeper to the present moment and go through my spiritual awakening, so to speak, if you want to call it that. I started to have these intuitive nudges to go in certain directions, and I completely doubted them for a while. And I realized that eventually I just had to commit fully. But it's about understanding what that intuition is and how to then fully trust in that. So what you have to understand right off the bat is that your intuition only speaks to you when you're in a high consciousness state. If you feel heaviness, if you feel worries, if you feel anxieties, that is not your intuition. Okay, being tapped into your intuition is a very light energy. It's it's a deep connection to the present moment. It's a feeling where you know for sure that your mind and your heart are totally balanced. Now, the opposite of that is being in the ego. Being in the state of fear, being in the state of anxieties, being in the state of worries that come from the past and the future. The ego is the number one thing that is going to block you from fully stepping into your intuition. I'm just going to tell you right off the bat. In my experience, in my clients' experiences, you have to realize that the ego is a complete block to your intuition. So in order to really tap into your intuition, before I tell you how to fully trust in your intuition, understand that your intuition comes from a high consciousness state when you're totally tapped into the present moment, right? When you're totally tapped into the now, to that awareness that you really are, that's when the intuition starts to speak to you, because you start to have higher quality thoughts when you're in a high consciousness state. Now, when I say high consciousness state, some people are thinking, well, that's not practical, that's too esoteric for me. You got to realize, when I say the word high consciousness state, what I'm really talking about is just a deep connection to the moment, where the past and the future are not dominating your experience so much, but you're more connected to the now. Like, that's all I mean when I say high consciousness state. When people say high vibration state or high consciousness state, what they're really pointing you to is just a deep connection to the present moment. And that's what I feel like a lot of people don't quite understand in the spiritual community, in the law of attraction community. It's just a deep connection to the now. Now, what I noticed in my experience is that the deeper connection that I have to the now, the more that my intuition starts to speak to me. And then you have that intuition, but then what happens? You then step out of the now, and then you start to doubt those thoughts that you had when you were tapped into the now. Because being in the now doesn't mean that you have no thoughts. It means that you transcend the mind. You still use the mind, but now the mind is not dominating you anymore. You're transcending the mind. You still use the mind, but now the mind is in alignment with the heart. And when I say heart, what I mean really is that awareness that you really are, that is deeply connected to the moment. Now, before I go deeper into this topic, just understand this one thing, that your intuition speaks to you when you're in a deep meditative state, when you're totally connected to the now, when you're very present to the moment. And that's the truth. That's how your intuition speaks to you. It may come in the form of just a feeling, like an intuitive feeling. It could literally be a voice in your head, because some people think, how do I know if that voice in my head, that inner voice, is intuition or it's ego? Well, if that voice is connected to a feeling of fear, you know it's the ego speaking to you. It's not the intuition. It's always going to be intuition when you're tapped into that state. Now, following that intuition may be fear. I don't really know if I should go through with this. I don't really know if I should do this. I'll give you an example in just a moment, but you got to realize, in that exact present moment where you have that intuition, that's intuition. When it's followed by fear, that's not the intuition anymore. Then that's the ego getting in the way of that intuition that you had at the beginning. Because when you clear the mind, when you're totally tapped into the now, you become a channel for the universe. You become a channel for the higher power. You become a channel for higher intelligence to flow through you. And the first way you understand this is by realizing that a high consciousness state, being totally connected to the now, is when that intuition begins to open up. So the second thing you have to understand, once again, is that fear and ego block intuition. Fear and ego completely block that connection to source. And by the way, when I say source or high vibration or higher power, some people can get totally thrown off by these terms. It's just me telling you that when you're present to the moment, you experience higher efficiency with the actions that you take. You make more logical decisions. Even sometimes those decisions may seem illogical. I'll just give you an example. So when I was dropping out of school, I had this intuition, so to speak, that just literally, if I'm totally honest with myself, in that present moment that I was in, I was totally connected to the now. I had a very good high consciousness state that literally it was a voice. It's a straight up voice that came in my mind, but I wasn't attached to that voice. I was just observing the voice, and it said, drop out of school. It just straight up said, drop out of school. Now, you could imagine the resistance that came after that thought, because I've already been in school for 2 years. I've invested thousands of dollars and all these different things. I'm thinking, like, why would I drop out of school? That doesn't make logical sense. But it wasn't a logical thing. It was a intuitive thing. You see, it was completely against all logic, to be honest. It made no logical sense to make that decision. But then following that thought was then the over logical part of my mind then getting in the way and stopping me from fully hearing that intuition. And then the moment that I decided to just follow that intuition and then start recording videos, start coaching people, start doing what it is that I really want to do, then it all started to come together. And I realized that I could have trusted that intuition months ago. Like months ago, I waited so long when I knew deep in my heart that that's the intuition that was speaking to me. And I notice this with all my clients. They tap into the present moment, they have this intuitive thought, and then they doubt that thought, right? Do not doubt your inner voice. It's always the ego getting in the way. Now, the last thing I want to share with you when it comes to truly trusting your intuition is absolutely creating space in your life. Because when you're like, what is the ego? Part of the ego is the social conditioning of society. Now, the conditioned part of society comes from your family, from school, from friends, from all these different places. And you got to realize that when you don't create space, when you don't take some time alone to do your meditations, to listen to that inner voice intuition may be blocked by family, by social conditioning, right? By external influences. People think that their fears are their fears. I notice this with all my clients. Most of your fears are probably not even yours. It could be something you got from your parents or your upbringing, whoever the family you're born into, the people around you. Like, my fears weren't even my fears. And I notice this with all my clients. They think that their fears are theirs. I'm gonna bet you a lot of money that your fears are not even yours. And your intuition that comes from that fearless, selfless state is always there, but it's blocked by that ego. It's blocked by the conditioning. So you got to create some space to really tap into your gifts. If you consider yourself an empath or somebody that's going through a spiritual awakening process, and if you don't identify with any of those things, and you just want to create external success for yourself and create what it is that you want, you got to create space. You got to go within. You got to start meditating. You got to start connecting to who you really are, and then let that inner voice speak to you. But only that inner voice is going to give you the right answer when you come from a high consciousness state. Have you ever noticed that when you're in that energy of fear, your mind starts spitting stuff at you that's totally, it seems logical, but is it necessarily true? That's what my coach taught me. It can be logical, but it's not true objectively. It's just your mind spitting logical things at you that are too logical to the point where you're just living in fear. And there's a fine line between using your mind logically and just totally living in fear and allowing your mind to consume you completely. That's the fine line you got to find, where you transcend the mind. You become more connected to the moment. You connect more to truth rather than just your mind. And then you use that to propel and have a catalyst for your dreams. You got to understand that the mind is always going to get in the way, but you have to use the mind for the tool that it is. Don't just, listen to the mind always. Only listen to the mind when you've created space, when you enter that high consciousness state. And I promise to you, if you follow that energy, if you follow the inner voice that your mind is speaking to you, only from that high consciousness state, it's not going to do you wrong. It may seem scary, it may seem uncertain, but life is inherently uncertain. Following that uncertainty is what life is about. That's how you create success. That's how you follow your soul's mission, is following that uncertainty that comes from that intuition in the moment. Like, I had all sorts of thoughts. I had a couple thousand left in my bank account. My intuition told me, invest that money into a coach. Fearlessly. What do you think happened? Fear came in afterwards. Why should I invest that money? How am I going to make that money back? Is this really the right move? Fear, fear, fear. I tap back into the intuition. My mind says, invest in the coach. You'll be fine. You're going to make that money back. Then the mind comes in and says, how can you really do this? fear. You see, in that moment of intuition, you know intuitively what your mind is saying is true. It's only when you let the ego come back in and you let that old version of you come back into your reality, coming through the back door, is when your intuition gets blocked. Your intuition comes from deep connection to the moment. It comes from a feeling of flow and being totally connected to the now. Now, of course, life is uncertain. Life is totally in the unknown. I'm not promising to you that, there's not going to be consequences to following that intuition and that things are just going to flow effortlessly. You got to realize that there's consequences to any decision you make. So I don't want to be too esoteric and say, if you follow that intuition, everything's going to be beautiful like rainbows. No, there's serious consequences to following that intuition. The consequences are you're going to have to let go of the old self. You're going to have to make crazy illogical decisions. You're going to be triggering people around you because they're not going to support you. Like maybe to some degree they will, but they're going to be judging you. You're going to have judgments from people around you. You're going to be kind of an outlier. You're going to have to let go of the old self. You're going to have to make bold, illogical moves. Are you ready to do that? Now, of course, you're going to feel amazing doing all of that if you really are tapped into that intuition because you're following what it is that you really want to do. But are you ready to, be equipped to deal with all the external objections? I wasn't 100%, so that's why I needed a mentor. I can follow that intuition, but only to a certain extent. I needed that external support system. So I was like, okay, I'm going to follow that intuition. Internally, I have that support system. I have the meditations. Also, you know what? I need an external support system to help me go on that path. And I needed somebody that was already where I wanted to be. So then I did that. And now 5 months later, I'm creating what it is that I wanted in my life. I'm creating more finances. I'm creating more abundance. I'm really stepping into what I wanted to create. And that's just the beginning of my journey. I followed that intuition despite what the ego says afterwards, what it said afterwards, you can't do this. And then it starts to pay off. Now, of course, it's not an easy journey sometimes to be on the spiritual awakening path. People aren't going to understand you. There's heaviness sometimes. There's worries, but that's all normal. And it's all totally worth it because you're following what it is that you want to do. Like, think about it like this. This is what I said to my client the other day. What's the alternative to following your intuition? Are you just going to follow a life of the ego and then listen to what society tells you to do? Is that the alternative? You can take either path. You can choose the path of love. You can choose the path of truth. You can choose the hero's journey, follow your intuition. Or what's the alternative? You follow the path of fear. You live a life where you're doing things for other people. You're letting narcissists control your life. You're not listening to the inner voice. You're doing something that you don't enjoy, and then that's your life, and then you die. Now, I'm not saying that from fear. I'm saying that out of love because I care about you. I truly care about every single person that watches my videos. If you're watching this video, I truly want you to tap into that intuition because you see that the alternative is terrible. Like, of course, there's consequences to following that intuition. Yes, there's consequences, but there's also worse consequences, in my opinion, to following the path of fear. Now, it's not just an opinion, it is the truth. It is the truth. You follow the path of fear, you create destruction for yourself and the people around you. You follow the path of love, you create abundance for yourself and the people around you. The ego is the lose-lose. Following your intuition is what I call the path of the win-win. You win, everybody else wins. So just to finish out this video, I want to say that if you're following my channel, if you're following my videos, listen to that inner voice. Listen to that inner voice from that high consciousness state. It will never do you wrong, even if it seems illogical. Of course, still use the mind. Like, make sure you have a place to stay, make sure you have food on the table, but then after that, don't be over logical, because sometimes the mind can also say, okay, now you're saying I use the mind, so that gives me permission to not listen to my intuition because I need to survive. No, that's where your mind is coming in too much. Don't let the mind actually stop you from creating what it is that you want. Use the mind as the tool that it's designed to be, but do not be consumed by the mind. Use your mind. Don't allow your mind to use you. How do you do this? You become present in the moment. You enter that high consciousness state. You create space. Okay? Isolate yourself from society a little bit. Now, of course, bring your light back into the world when you're ready. That's a huge part of the journey. Don't just isolate forever. I know some of you needed to hear that. Don't isolate forever. Bring yourself back into the world, but create space. Don't be afraid to create space. Don't be afraid to, not talk to people. Don't be afraid to be alone. Connect with that inner voice. Connect with that intuition. Get to that high consciousness state. Listen to what your mind is telling you, but only when it's balanced with the heart. And you'll be able to create pretty much anything that you want in your life. So that's all I have for this video. Once again, if you want to work with me one-on-one to let go of your ego, let go of the anxieties, tap deep into your intuition, and fully trust in that intuition, follow your highest vision, then hit the link that's in the description box of this video to apply for a free consultation to see if you're a good fit for the coaching program. Have yourself a great day. Listen to that inner voice, and I'll see you in the next video.